Welcome to the Slow Living Collective podcast. I'm Amy, wife, mother of two and devoted homemaker. Join me on this journey as we explore the beauty of slow and simple living, where life unfolds at its own unhurried pace. I'll take you through my experiences of slowing down, tending to our allotment plot, finding joy in the little things and making the most of our small home. Together we'll learn to live in harmony with the ever-changing seasons, discovering the magic that lies in embracing the present moment. So let's embark on this enriching adventure towards a more intentional and fulfilling life. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Slow Living Collective podcast. If you're new here, I'm Amy and welcome to the Slow Living Collective. And if you're not new here, hi, I'm back. You might have been thinking, Amy, where have you been? Where have you been? So I took a little bit of a break over the summer in the end, and it has been wonderful and definitely needed, and it leads me on to the thing I want to tell you about before we dive into today's episode. And that is, I have been rethinking the podcast and how I go about it, how I am going to manage it with what is quite a busy life. Listen, let's be honest here. I am all about slowing down, living seasonally and just living a little outside of the norm, as you know. And I've been doing this podcast for 3 years. But life of mine, it's busy. I home educate my 2 children now, and my eldest would have been old enough to start school. He would have started school in September. And so I have the both of them learning very organically, of course, but it is busy. Life is busy. We have obviously doing our home education and doing our learning, and we have lots of home ed classes, we have extracurriculars, we have play dates, we have built a wonderful home ed community, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. But life is busy, and you know, one of the things I've been talking about quite frequently on Substack and on my Instagram is how, you know, we've been sold this idea of slow living being all very calm and beige linens and, you know, very gentle and baking sourdough. And for most of us, that's just not what it looks like. And, you know, I've been thinking over the summer while I took a break, what do I want the podcast to be like? Because I had this feeling sort of, I don't know, maybe late spring, that I felt like I was burning out a little with the podcast. And, you know, one of the things I talk about a lot is like stepping away from burnout and not being part of that. And so I very quickly sort of recognized that something obviously had to change. I couldn't be, you know, just this machine of creating podcast episodes if it wasn't really working for me. And so I had to think about what that would mean, and I sat with it for a really long time. And then it was kind of towards the end of July where I started thinking maybe I could switch how I podcast, because the way I've been podcasting for the last 3 years is pretty much constant. And as you've probably noticed, this year I dropped having any guests on the podcast at all, and that was mostly to protect my time. I love speaking to other people. I have loved having my guests on, but it does take up a huge chunk of time from scheduling and organising, doing the recording, doing the editing, whereas I just edit as I go, and sometimes I don't edit at all. I'm very on the fly. This is not a polished production by any means. This is just me sitting on a bed in my house. The most glamorous thing I have is I bought myself a microphone about 18 months ago, right? And it just got me thinking, how am I going to do it? What am I going to do? Because I can't be stuck in this loop where it's just podcast after podcast after podcast forever and ever and ever. Because yes, there are plenty of people that do that, but they have teams behind them, they have production behind them, you know. They just show up, they do the episode, and then they go, and then that's it. Somebody else is editing it, somebody else is doing the marketing. That's not me. I am a one-man band, and yeah, I have to do the whole thing. And so while podcasting is one of the more fun aspects of doing a business and running a business, it does take time. And I had to start thinking about, how am I going to manage that, because there's no point in me doing it if it's going to burn me out. And so what I decided was, I am still going to podcast tons, but I'm going to break it up into basically 4 seasons a year, and each season is going to be around 8 to 10 episodes long. And so it will cover probably maximum 40 weeks of the year, which gives me at least 12 weeks off. Some seasons will be 10 episodes, some will be 8. I've already figured it out. So we are diving in today, October, and we are going to have 10 episodes that will see us through into December. Then I will be taking a break, and I will see you again about a month later in January, and then I will have a break again in March, and then I'll have a break again in the summer. And so it's going to be very much tied into the seasons as well. A lot of what we talk about here is about the seasons, and not everything is going to be strictly, the next 10 episodes are not going to be strictly about autumn, but there will be that element of autumn, so that it meets you where you're at as well, and meets you at the right time. And so I decided that was probably the easiest way to split it up, and it also just gives me the freedom that I need as well. Like, I am a batch worker, that's how my brain works. I batch, so I will probably crack out a bunch of episodes all in one go, and then I'm done. And so that is how I work. That is how I work best. So that's where we're going to be at. And there will be probably 12 to 14 weeks of the year where there won't be a podcast episode. That will be my time to rest, because rest is so important. And that's kind of what I wanted to get across, really, was that it needed to work. And like I said in a previous episode, I needed to walk the walk, because I can sit here all day long and tell you guys, this is why you should live slowly, this is how you can live with more simplicity and more intention. And if I don't walk the walk myself, then what good is it really? So that's what I'm thinking. I create content every week anyway over on Substack. So in those 12 to 14 weeks where you're not getting a podcast episode, you'll get something else instead. So you won't even notice, and it will give me better freedom in my life, and it will give me just the ability to really rest, I think. And I think tying the podcast to the actual seasons will really work based on what this podcast is about, because it's going to create a natural rhythm for me and hopefully for you as well. And each season, I hope, will feel fresher and just more connected to what's going on around all of us. And that just aligns perfectly with the show, and the values that I have, the values that I know you guys have, of just living this slower, more intentional life. And I just think it's going to be a better option, and I think it's going to work much better. That's where we're at. So without further ado, maybe we should now dive into the rest of the episode, because today I want to talk about autumn. We are back on the podcast, and back in autumn. And used to be one of my favourite seasons. I don't know if it still is, but today we are diving deep into autumn, because it's one of those seasons that is beautiful. There is so much that is visually beautiful in autumn. I also find it quite bittersweet, but also that it gives us this reminder to slow down. So if you're like most people, and like me, autumn brings with it kind of pressure. We're in October now, but I think it's certainly in the Northern Hemisphere, we tend to, and particularly in the UK, right, we tend to go back to school in England in September. I know Scotland is usually a few weeks earlier at the end of August, but it brings with it this time of like getting back on track. there's planners and uniforms and everything. The kids can't, before they've even broken up from school, back to school is everywhere. And even if you don't have a child in the school system like I don't, or even if you don't have children at all, there's this just natural spin that occurs around September time. Like, we all feel it, even though we might not be connected to it anymore, because we've all been through it. We've all been to school for the most part. We all had that, New Year vibe around September. And it just follows us. It's across all of society. This get back on track. It's time to hustle again. Summer's over. We've got X amount of things ahead of us as we lead up to Christmas. And just this sense that we should be doing more. But what I want to propose to you today is, what if in this season, instead of speeding up, instead of feeling like we should speed up, which is what society is telling us, what if this season was actually meant for slowing down? And I just want to talk through for the rest of this episode about the cultural pressure to hustle through the autumn months. And instead, I want to flip it on its head, and I want to invite you to honour the natural rhythm of autumn, a time where things are supposed to be winding down. So firstly, I want to propose this to you, that doing less does not mean you're falling behind. It doesn't mean that you're lazy. It simply means that you're leaning into the natural flow of the autumn season. And the autumn season gives us the perfect opportunity for rest, reflection, and preparation for the winter months ahead. So why does this pressure exist in the first place? So I think this just, like I said, stems back from school. And as soon as September rolls around, there is this societal expectation to just get back on track. And it's like the world suddenly shifts from this relaxed, sunny vibe, and suddenly everything is fast paced again. Back to school, back to work, back to the grind. If you're not keeping up, you're falling behind. Behind what? I don't know, but anyway. And it's not just that external pressure that we feel and we can see in society around us, because we internalize it too. And we have this little voice inside of our heads that say, okay, summer's over, now it's time to get back to it. And we feel it, don't we? That push to fill our calendars with all the things that we should be doing, whether it's work projects or preparation for Christmas that lies ahead, or endless list of autumn activities. Maybe if you've got kids, you might feel like, oh, we've got to go to the pumpkin patch and celebrate Halloween. And it's as if we believe that if we don't do all of these things, we will somehow be left behind. But I want to throw this out there to you. Who says that we have to rush? Who says that autumn must be this season of pressure, of deadlines, of non-stop movement? Because actually, in nature, it's the opposite. Autumn is a natural time of transition, and it's a season where nature starts to slow down. The days are getting shorter. We're moving from the abundance we felt during summer. We're harvesting produce, and we're getting ready for the quieter, colder months ahead. So we might be conditioned to hustle, but actually what we're doing is we're missing this really critical opportunity to reflect, slow down, and prepare for the winter. And I want to tell you that, maybe we need to just stop for a minute. If instead of speeding up, we just decided to slow down and match the season, then we would be much more in step with what autumn is really about, and about leaning into the energy of the season. So let's go back to nature for a second, because in nature, autumn is when things begin to wind down. We'll see the trees shedding their leaves, animals are out there gathering their stores for the winter, and the earth starts to pull in its energy. And there is something that we can relate to in that, because autumn is about harvesting of what has been grown, reflecting on all the work we've done so far in the year, and about resting. It is not about doing more. It is about finishing what we started and preparing ourselves for the stillness of winter. And so this is what I want to propose to you. I want to invite you to ditch the guilt that comes with doing less, because doing less in autumn doesn't mean you're falling behind, doesn't mean that you're not productive or achieving anything. It is a seasonal pause that is there for a reason, and a necessary reset. And if we push through autumn with the same hustle and urgency as we have had through spring and summer, where we are naturally at our peak more, we're going to miss out on this really important period of rest and renewal. So I want you to think about embracing slowing down. I want you to take a look at nature and watch what nature's doing and try and mimic it in your own life. Maybe take some time, if you're a journaler, maybe sit down and journal about the last year, or just think about it. You don't have to put pen to paper. Think about, how the seasons ebb and flow. We started in January and February where we were still in the depths of winter, and then we feel that awakening in the spring and we're starting to get more energy, and then we're at our peak in the summer. And it's only natural that when autumn rolls round, we start to feel that slowdown and we start to prepare for the winter again. And as with anything, spring will come round again, and we must honour these little 4 quarters of our seasonal life, because spring is our awakening, summer is our peak, autumn is the beginning of our slowdown, and winter is stillness. And so have a think, what worked this year, what didn't, what do you want to leave behind? And if you're a gardener like I am, it's a great time of year to start preparing your soil for next year. If you're in the UK like I am, there's lots of beautiful walks, the scenery is incredible as the leaves start to turn. You don't have to be constantly rushing, you don't have to constantly be striving towards the next thing. You can simply be, and that is enough. Alright guys, let's get real for a second. Even if we decide to slow down and embrace the season, we still have that sneaky little voice of guilt, right? But what about all the things we haven't done? What if I'm missing out? And listen, I get it. Hustle culture is real, but here is the truth. And I've already said it this episode, possibly multiple times, that doing less doesn't mean you're missing out. In fact, when we start to slow down and carve out space for simple pleasures that are related to the season we're in, we can experience autumn in a way that is richer, deeper, and much more satisfying. So here are just a few things that I really enjoy, some really simple joys that you can savor. Have a listen, see what you think, and it might be that you can identify with some of these things, or you want to give them a try this season. They're really simple. It could be having a hot drink on a cooler morning as the weather starts to cool down. There is something so magical, I find, when the temperature starts to turn slightly. It's still warm enough, I guess, to be outside, having a warm drink in your hand, and it's just this little moment of peace in a crazy world that constantly wants more from you. Another one, like I've already said, is those beautiful crisp autumn walks. The sun is incredible in autumn. It was lower in the sky, you've got that beautiful golden light, crunchy leaves beneath our feet, the cooler air at last. We've had a very, very hot summer, and I know not everybody loves the winter and the colder months, but just to be cool for a little bit again. But all of this, it's just nature's invitation to be outside, breathe deeply, be present, look up at the trees, watch how they swish in the breeze. You don't have to rush, there doesn't have to be an agenda. It's just you, the earth, and just the beauty of the changing season. And I think that is probably my favourite thing about autumn. And I've said this before, I've said this so many times on the podcast, I've said it so many times on Instagram, over on my Substack. Autumn to me is a time of coming inside. It's how I think about autumn. It's coming inside. I start to spend more time inside my home. I spend a lot of time outside all year round, as much as possible. But I definitely feel that ebb and flow of the different seasons, and so I definitely feel like autumn is this time of coming inside my home and spending more time in here, coming inside to myself and just reflecting on where I am, how I'm gonna preserve myself for the months ahead and get through winter, which is not my favourite, and you know, that hope that spring does come again, and you know, we will once again see the sunshine and feel the warmth on our skin again. And it's just that theory, that idea that everything happens in its own time. And so when I come inside to myself and into my home in the autumn, I spend a lot more time baking and doing a lot more from scratch cooking compared to the summer, where I'm just trying to survive and it's a lot of salad, which I love because that's what I love growing. So yeah, you know, maybe more cooking in autumn. I feel like in the autumn it feels like a more slower, more intentional process as well. There's no need to hurry. Everything is not feeling too hot. Like baking in the summer is not my favourite. And another thing I love to do is just doing a little bit of seasonal decorating. Now I'm not a person who advocates for like having to go out and like spend loads of money and decorate your home, but I do like to add little touches of autumn, things that I get out year after year after year. I've got some little knitted pumpkins, I've got some dried flowers. I actually create a few just for myself, some prints that I have in some frames, and I have one for every season, and I just change those round. And it's just very affordable. I created it myself in Canva, you know, just print them out. I have 4 in the frame, and when a new season rolls around, I just move it round. Very cheap frames from IKEA, and it just works really well. But don't get caught up in making that picture perfect. The point is to bring nature indoors. So we always will go out and collect conkers and acorns and leaves, and we will just have like a little bit of a nature table. And yeah, so that's another thing that I really like to do. And just the opportunity to have some more slower evenings, with whether it be with my family or just by myself, because it's that level of peace. Because what we're doing is using autumn as a time of preparation. That's what nature is doing, and nature is preparing, and it will prepare in its own time. So instead of getting swept up in the panic of getting ready for winter or getting ready for Christmas or having to finish everything before the end of the year, I want you to think about this in terms of nature. Autumn is the perfect time to prepare for winter, both mentally, physically and emotionally as well, in a way that feels a lot more intentional. So I want you to take a step back and ask yourself, what do I need to do to rest? What could I let go of? And it is about creating space to restore your energy so you can truly enjoy the colder months rather than entering winter feeling depleted and burnt out. And perhaps this means you take a break from big projects, or you scale back on your social obligations. I know, for one, my calendar looks so much busier through spring and summer, and then autumn, and then into winter I really start to slow it down. Because that's how I feel. I feel like I'm coming inside. I feel like I need that time to rest and recharge so that I can be my best self on the other side. And, you know, I think ahead to winter, and I think of it in terms of nature. I think of it like a hibernation. And yes, I'm not completely hibernating, and you're not going to see me for 3 months, but instead, you know, I'm just winding down, and I'm just doing the bare minimum that it takes to get through the winter. And so I want to remind you that it's okay to step back, and it is okay to not do everything, and you have permission to rest. So I hope that was really helpful. And as we move into autumn, I want you to remember this, that the slowing down and the doing less is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of, firstly, wisdom, but it is also a sign of connecting with nature, because autumn invites us to rest and reflect and prepare for the months ahead. So I want you to take this time unapologetically and lean into the simple pleasures of the season. Have a look at what nature's doing. Follow nature. It doesn't get it wrong, right? The rest of society and what it tells us to do is manufactured. Look outside your window, step outside your door, look at what nature is doing and use it as a guide. Follow it. Because, like I said, Nature doesn't get it wrong, and it does it all in its own time. So I want you to lean into the simple pleasures of autumn. Let go of the guilt that you should be doing more. Let go of the rush, and just honour the natural rhythm of this beautiful time of year. So thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found this episode helpful, I would love for you to share it with someone who might need this reminder. You can also leave me a rating or a review and let me know how you're embracing slow and seasonal rhythm this autumn. So you can find me over on Substack, which will have this podcast and all of my previous podcasts. But if you find today's podcast, you will also be able to find the show notes that are attached to it, which has a few little extra bits that I haven't gone through in this episode. They're always worth a read. You can find me on Substack, theslowlivingcollective.substack.com. You can also find me over on Instagram at The Slow Living Collective. Thank you again so much for listening to today's episode, and I will catch you in the next one.